All right. Can you see that okay?
Okay. Does Christados know?
No, but he won't. We'll end it for him. You know, like he'll know when we'll jump in, Chris, when it's time to end.
Okay.
You know, that way you know for timing.
Yes.
All right. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Speed Traveler Roadshow. If you're listening to us live in Newhall, California, you're listening on KHTS radio, and it is Cars and Coffee time. I'm joined in the studio today with Kelly, and also Chris is joining us via telephone. Chris, what's going on with you?
Oh my God, it's so great to be back on the air with you guys. I wish I was in studio, but at least I can call it in. I don't know if you told anyone, but I got stricken with the COVID virus, and it put the screws to me. But I'm feeling so much better now. I'm ready to go for a drive and have a little coffee.
We're actually glad you're home and not here infecting the world. But yeah, it's a bummer. I didn't think people were getting too sick from COVID. Had you had COVID before? Maybe that's why you got so sick.
You know, I can't be certain that I have or have not had COVID. I've not tested positive for COVID previously. But I got to tell you, this one, I mean, it really put me down. It was the worst flu symptoms I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
And I was basically bedridden for 3 days.
Unbelievable. Well, the good news is I've been waiting for the show for a long time. We're going to switch back to Cars and Coffee. And the featured marque today is Ferrari. And I know, Chris, you and I have been waiting a long time to do a Ferrari show. And ironically, Ferrari won the Formula One race over the weekend.
Oh my God, was that an incredible race or what? I mean, it was you saw the pace that the Ferrari had at Monza the previous week with Carlos Sainz getting the pole. Speaking of which, Carlos Sainz is really starting to drive that car incredibly well. He got pole again at Singapore, and honestly, not through any strategy of Ferrari, but through incredible driving skill and etiquette of Carlos Sainz, he was able to really hang on to that win.
Oh, yeah. It was pretty amazing. We're going to get into a little more in-depth dive into Formula One a little bit later in the show. If you haven't listened to the Speed Traveler Roadshow before, we talk all things cars. And today we're going to talk about, as we mentioned, the featured marque Ferrari. We're going to talk about some future collectors. If you're in the market, you want to buy a Ferrari, check out one of our, a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about cars you can buy now that are at the bottom of their depreciation cycle. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about the fun trips. Chris and I have taken speed traveler trips up and down the coast of California and all sorts of different places. And as I mentioned before, we're definitely going to talk a little Ferrari F1 news. But first, we've got Kelly in the studio, and she's going to talk Ferrari news.
Yeah, so I was doing my research, and it seems as though Ferrari's unveiled a new one-of-a-kind 812 Competizione to be auctioned at the Ferrari Gala in New York City. What I kind of love about this is it is all for charity. It goes straight to their charity. And it's interesting because it's one-of-a-kind. We always talk about collector cars, and this is a one-of-a-kind 812. They're making a couple other random types of 812s, and they're all getting auctioned at the gala in New York City.
That's pretty great. I can only imagine, Chris, what that might sell for.
Yeah, because the original ones, those sell for like $800,000. So let's see what a one-of-a-kind one would sell for.
You know, I would not be surprised to see that fetch probably over, $2.2 million at this auction because, like you said, Kelly, it is a one-of-a-kind car, but they are using some really bona fide Ferrari components in that car that just make it a fantastic car. I mean, one of the things I like most about it, it's a normally aspirated engine. This is not a turbocharged engine. This is a massive V12 engine that they're throwing in there that is just screams of that late 90s Michael Schumacher era Ferrari sound. I bet it's going to sound amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's amazing they're going to go old school V12, in the era of electric cars. I think they should. It's going to fetch a lot of money. You can buy can buy a Ferrari 812. They made them as recently as 2022, and they were, as Kelly mentioned, about 800,000 sticker. Not too inexpensive, but you can find a used one. We found 2018 Ferrari 812 Superfast for 310,000. That's used. So, not outrageous. If you're in the market for a Ferrari, you will definitely always get your money back if you buy right. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But man, that 812 sounds cool, Chris.
It really does. And it's interesting, Charlie, you mentioned you can't go wrong with buying a Ferrari. And I think you're absolutely right. Ferrari is one of those rare marques. It's a once in a millennial type of thing. It's one of those rare brands. It doesn't matter what Ferrari you have a good car. You have something that should, as long as you maintain it, should appreciate in value no matter what model you have. We're probably going to talk a little bit about the Mondial from the mid-'80s, and it's not the most amazing Ferrari ever, but it's still going to retain its value.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's a low barrier for entry. If you want to be part of the Ferrari crew and the Tifosi and enjoy all sorts of really fun events, it's the Ferrari Club of America. They've got cool stuff. We'll definitely get in deep on that a little bit later. But I agree with you, Chris. For $35,000, you can join the club.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat thing. And everyone has their little bit of opinion on what color a Ferrari should be, red.
I agree, red.
But I gotta say that yellow looks incredible, and they're offering the Superfast in that really metallic gray color. It's really, really sharp looking, but I don't know. As a Ferrari purist, if you will, I feel like red kind of needs to be the color.
Yeah, it does. And we'll talk definitely specifics on what cars we like, what Ferrari brands or what Ferrari models that we think are low on the depreciation cycle and on their way back up in value. But Kelly, it's funny, we talked Porsche last week, and we were talking about how the Sally car is seeing a spike. It's a 996, the Sally car from the movie Cars. And Cars 2 had a Ferrari, if I remember correctly, right? And it was Michael Schumacher's voice.
You know what? I think you're right. It was the Ferrari. It was the one F1 car in all of the races.
It was the Ferrari 360. We're going to talk a little bit. We'll talk Ferrari 360 later.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so that was towards the end of the movie. Michael Schumacher, his voice.
He makes a little cameo.
Yeah, exactly. But does that make Ferrari or Porsche more relevant to your generation, having seen it in cars, or doesn't register?
I think a car like that, where it's more of like a background sort of character, isn't going to register as much with our generation. I think more it would be actually Formula One. That's been registering a lot with our generation, as well as just social media, Instagram. They have a really good Instagram account, the Ferrari team and Ferrari in general. They both have really good Instagrams, and I think they have a great following, and they really know how to get our generation involved.
Yeah, I agree. That's funny. That is definitely the new generation's perspective. I wouldn't have really even thought of their social media presence and their Instagram, but it's the way the world's going right now.
Yeah.
So, hey, we are going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about fun things you can do in your own car. And this is the Speed Traveler Roadshow on KHTS Radio, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the Speed Traveler Roadshow. We are coming to you live Saturday morning. It is Cars and Coffee time, and we're coming to you live in Newhall, California on KHTS Radio, AM 1220. Also, you can always find our broadcasts on the Speed Traveler YouTube page. We've got all of the episodes uploaded there. So if there's something specific you're looking for, like you missed our show on the Corvette, you want to hear about Corvette, you can just click it right there. We did Porsche last weekend. That was a fun show. But today's feature mark is Ferrari. And we are going to talk fun things you can do with your Ferrari, Chris.
Yeah, it's it's a lot of fun to be had in a Ferrari. I don't care what model you're talking about. A Ferrari is just a fun car to drive, period.
Yeah, I agree. We did a video. It's called Ford versus Ferrari. You were in the Ferrari 430, right?
That's correct. 430 Spider, which means convertible.
And it just said, I agree. Like it just, there's nothing like driving a Ferrari. And yeah, it has some downside. You're gonna need to spend some money maintaining it properly, and you're gonna have to find a good Ferrari mechanic. It's a little easier if you're in LA or Chicago, because there's a lot of independent Ferrari mechanics. Not so much if you get into the more rural areas. So, it's something you want to consider unless you can do the work yourself. But
well, what's nice is a lot of the Ferraris up until about 2012, a little earlier, 2007, up until about 2007, it was a much more analog type of car. Everything now has gotten very electronic. It's all about the ECU, and prior to about 2007, it was a much more analog and mechanical car. So if you have any mechanical wherewithal, you could actually do a lot of work on a Ferrari yourself, believe it or not. I mean, you have to be painstakingly careful. It's not like taking a Volkswagen plug apart.
Right.
But you can do a lot of the work yourself. The brake systems now, because Ferrari's been using Brembo brakes for so very, very long, it's a lot easier to get those Brembo brake parts if you need to do a brake bleed or a brake pad or a brake rotor replacement. It's much easier to do that now than it was, say, in 1985 working on your 308.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But getting back to fun things to do with the Ferrari, Ferrari's got an amazing club. It's the Ferrari Club of America. Kelly and we were talking about it a little bit this morning, and you mentioned it in the first segment, Chris, but the barrier to entry is pretty low. I mean, we've seen $30,000 Ferrari Mondials and a few others, and that's not bad. And what's cool about the Ferrari Club is if you go to the club events, and we've been to a few, the guy with the $30,000 Mondial is treated exactly the same as the guy who has the $800,000 812. So really, lots of ways to get involved. They've got car shows. They've got all sorts of fun events. So they have I'm reading off a list here right off of their website, but they've got track days where you can go to the track and you get some instruction. And we've done a lot of those days, Chris.
You're right. The Ferrari Club of America and the Ferrari Club worldwide, it's a great community to exactly those points. They do these track days where you can, they'll have performance driver coaches, some old guys that have been around forever, raced cars, and some younger guys that, are more current with like the latest electronics and everything like that. And it's a very, surprisingly, it's Ferrari. We're talking about, very expensive vehicles, but it's a very inclusive group, and it's a really nice thing. I mean, the Ferrari Club of America was founded in 1962, and there's like 53 or so chapters around the United States, little microcosms of Ferrari clubs. You can find them in San Diego. You can find them in Fort Lauderdale. You mentioned Chicago. Of course, Los Angeles has got a massive following. And there's great tracks in all these regions where you can have a lot of fun driving your Ferrari at a pace that you're comfortable with and beyond.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, lots of fun. They've got tracks in every region, and it's a good point. You could drive as fast or slow as you want. I mean, obviously they encourage people to go fast, but within reason. But they also don't care if you don't want to damage your precious baby, and that's something that's unique about Ferrari. You go to some of the other track driving days, which we've been to many, and it's like all-out war on the track.
Oh, yeah. People trying to win the race on pit exit.
Yeah. But some of the other great things you can do with the Ferrari Club and being a Ferrari member is they've got Judge Concours d'Elegance, and they always make them in really fun areas. They've got ride and drive events where you go as a caravan up to like Hearst Castle and Sonoma. They've got an event at the Peterson Auto Museum, which is very cool, and the Nethercut, which is in the Los Angeles area. They've got all sorts of get-togethers. They've got a Halloween event. So yeah, it's really quite cool, And I'm glad we brought it up because it's something when you buy a Ferrari, you don't really realize you've got this amazing support group.
You're absolutely right about that. And to add to that even further, if you don't own a Ferrari, but you want to go check out these events, it's so worthwhile going. I mean, there's a little bit of a cover charge for some of these events. Some there isn't a cover charge, but most of them have a bit of a cover charge. But the thing is you're going to go to, like you said, Charlie, an incredible Concours d'Elegance on the history and the breadth of the Ferrari lineup. And on top of that, the catering is always spectacular. You're going to
right.
be included in an event that is just so well run, and the food is so good, and the people, like you said, are so approachable and so friendly. You're going to have a good time, whether you're a Ferrari aficionado or not. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and as you said, it goes the whole gamut. You can go driving, you could do a concours, you can do track days. But I wanted to mention, as far as track days, I mean, obviously that's really near and dear to our heart. But the Ferrari Challenge North America and Ferrari Challenge International, that if you've got the budget, we have a buddy of ours named Todd Johnson, a great guy. He actually did some Ferrari Challenge events and he loved them. They are not cheap. The prices are not listed on the website. I'm guessing it's about $100K a weekend. But
the answer to that is if you have to ask what it costs, you can't afford it.
Right, exactly. So if you're in the upper echelon and you want the ultimate Ferrari experience, you can enter in the Ferrari Challenge. You've got to work your way up to it. You've got to show that you're a competent race car driver. But they have a pro category and an amateur category, and then they also, as you move up in between the two, they have the pro AM category where the amateur rider is paired up with a professional driver to help advance your skill set. Yeah, but what amazing tracks. I mean, in the States, they race at COTA, which is the Circuit of the Americas. They race at Sonoma, which we love. We just raced at Road America, Road Atlanta. So just great. And then internationally, they race at Le Mans. I mean, how cool is that? And Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium.
And don't forget all the great tracks in Italy that, you don't get to really hear about in the automotive sports world. You'll hear more about them in MotoGP, but like Mugello, I mean, that is one of my favorite all-time tracks. And we just don't see, say, Formula One on those tracks with any regularity because everyone defers to Monza and to Imola as the big tracks in Italy. And Italy is just literally littered with amazing racetracks. So any of those tracks in a Ferrari would just be unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree. And they have an annual trip. I noticed on the Ferrari Club of America website, they've got a trip to Nürburgring. They do that once a year. They go to Spa-Francorchamps once a year. So there again, when you're buying a Ferrari, you're joining the fraternity.
Yes. Yeah.
Or sorority. Right, Kelly?
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to definitely talk a little more Ferrari when we come back from the next break. We're going to talk about if you're interested in joining the group, we're going to give you some ideas on Ferraris that we think are going up in value, that we've hit at the right time, that we always talk about the depreciation cycle, Chris. And that's where, a car may be 190 or 200,000 when it's new, and then 5 years later it's worth 140, and then 10 years later it's down to 80, and then at some point you could mark it on a graph. At some point they start going up in value. Now, obviously, it doesn't happen with a Toyota. No offense, Toyota, but it definitely will happen with a Ferrari or a Porsche or a Corvette. So we're going to talk, when we come back, a little bit about that depreciation cycle and some of our picks for Ferrari ownership. And you are listening to the Speed Traveler Roadshow on KHTS Radio. You can also find us on our YouTube channel, which is The Speed Traveler. And if you got any questions for us, hit us up on the YouTube channel and we'll get right back to you. Thanks for listening. All right. Welcome back to the Speed Traveler Roadshow locally in Newhall, California on KHTS Radio. You can also catch all of our shows if you want to hear some of the older ones and a specific mark you're looking for. Find us on the Speed Traveler YouTube page at The Speed Traveler. I'm joined back with Chris now. Chris is unfortunately not in the studio because of a slight illness that we've covered in block one. But we're going to talk now about some Ferraris that you can find if you want to join the Ferrari club. I mean, obviously, Chris, you can go buy a new one if you want to pay absolute top dollar, and some people like that experience. But we're also going to talk about finding ones that are lower in their depreciation cycle. And we always talk about depreciation cycles on the Speed Traveler. I mean, part of the show is us helping people find classic cars and race cars and exotic cars and not getting totally ripped off. So
right.
One way to do that is,
and to that point, Charlie, I mean, we always talk about doing the due diligence on, as an example, Craigslist is being a great place to find a lot of different cars. But the Ferrari marque is not a car you're really going to find on Craigslist. You're going to have to do a little bit of a deeper dive onto some different platforms like Haggerty's or Car Gurus even has some. But, you're going to have to kind of go to a higher echelon of reseller than you might be able to normally use like Craigslist.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, generally, Chris and I are always preaching to go on to Craigslist and go area by area. They've made it a little easier now. There's a little pull down menu if you go to used cars for sale, Craigslist, and there's a pull down menu now on the far left where it'll say Los Angeles or use map. If you use the map, you can expand the map to basically half of the U.S. And do a search there, and then the second half of the U.S. on a second search. So that was a great additional feature. If you're looking for maybe, a 78 Corvette, like that is the ideal place to find it. But that's a good point, Chris. You don't really find a lot of Ferraris on Craigslist. So you're going to have to...
This is definitely a Haggerty's type of environment. I mean, Haggerty specializes in this type of vehicle. They definitely, they know these brands really, really well. They know the value of the brand. They know what's a car that is in good nick and not in good nick. So definitely Haggerty's is a great platform. Otherwise, I mean, you definitely need to do your due diligence on this purchase of any Ferrari, because you got to be mindful, because there was a period of time, I believe it was like in the late 80s, where people were trying to sell replica Ferraris.
Right,
I think it was based on the Pontiac Fiero chassis.
Right.
And they're trying to sell it as we're going to talk about this model in a moment, the Mondial. They're trying to sell a Pontiac Fiero as a Mondial, and people were falling for it.
Yeah, it's crazy. And just getting back to close the loop on Haggerty, also a great feature they have on that site is they have the valuation tool. So you can go in and see what they've been selling for. So as you said, Chris, I mean, if you're going to go buy a Ferrari and you want to get a good deal and you want to make money down the road, you're really going to have to do your homework and you're going to have to invest yourself. But that's part of the fun.
Yes. Oh, the deep dive is definitely the cool thing, because you'd be surprised, if you start looking at some of the owner histories of these cars, it's not your average, Chris and Charlie out of LA. It's some really interesting people have owned these cars. And sometimes that ownership heritage can actually increase the value of the car.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we're going to do a video on trying to find a specific car, and that was the car that was owned by Hal Needham. It's I believe it's a 79 308. And he loaned it, or he used it in the movie The Cannonball Run. And, it's going to be great fun to try and track that car down. It probably won't add a whole lot of value to the car. It might add a little bit, but it's, as you said, it's the fun of doing the research and really digging in. And, that's something that's pretty unique to Ferrari.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that particular Hal Needham car, though, was in the Cannonball Run. I mean, interestingly enough, it was driven by Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin.
Right.
And quite frankly, honestly, To me, that adds not only cachet but value, financial value to that vehicle.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Lamborghini Countach that was featured in that movie was tracked down, and it sold for quite a bit more than a traditional Lamborghini Countach. So I guess it just depends on what movie and what car, because the movie cars don't always get a premium, which is funny. But for some reason, the Lamborghini from that movie sure did.
That sure did. That's a really good example of that kind of cachet marquee value.
Yeah, and so if you're serious about buying a Ferrari and owning one, I'm going to mention 3 letters right now. It's PPI, and that means pre-purchase inspection. You hit on it before, Chris. You do not want to roll the dice on buying a Ferrari.
No, that pre-purchase inspection is absolutely vital. If you do not know absolutely everything about that particular model that you're looking into, this is where a specialist really comes in handy. You mentioned at Hagerty before, they have people that specialize in exactly this arena, and it's vital that you take advantage. Let me rephrase, that you do not skip on this aspect of your vehicle purchase.
I agree. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to waste, it could be anywhere from $300 to probably $1,000. I mean, we'll say 500 as an average. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to waste $500, but trust us. We've done this a long time. We've owned a lot of cars, and you definitely need to do a pre-purchase inspection on a Ferrari. And you're going to have to
we've been bit by that animal before.
Yeah, we have been bit by that animal once or twice. So take it from us. We've been stung, and we want to share a great way to buy a Ferrari. But talking about some specific models, Chris, I like to use the Ferrari 575 example. That was their Grand Touring Coupe. It was 2 seats. It has a V12. And they made those in the 2001, I believe, to 2005. But what's interesting about that is I remember not that long ago being with my cousin and your friend Stanley, who was looking at Ferraris, and he was between the manual and the automatic. He didn't really want the manual because it's a little bit of a pain. And there was a small difference in value at that time. I think the cars, when we were looking, this is probably 2013 or 14, but the 575 V12 was around $90,000. The manual is about $100,000. Wasn't much more. Now, as of this morning, we looked on Car Gurus, which is another great place to find Ferraris. What's nice about Car Gurus is the way the information is laid out. You can see what the whole story is across the country. You can see what they're getting, and you can see 10 or 12 of them. So we found 8 Ferrari 575s with the automatic, and those were, well, they call it F1, I guess, the F1 gearbox. And those were between 125 and 135,000. The manual, the only one that was on there, 299,000 for the same car.
And there's only one.
Yeah,
that's less than 10% of the market.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. The manuals are definitely the way to go in a Ferrari. I mean, if you live in LA, you may not want a manual, but if you're buying the car for resale value in 10 years or so, I mean, you have to look at manuals.
You absolutely have to look at the manual. Now, the automatic, when we say automatic, sure, you can just run it in full automatic, but I believe that was like the first generation of, you said, the Formula One gearbox, the paddle shifter, which technically they would consider an automatic transmission, which was what was called the hydroelectric transmission.
Right.
Gearbox. And it's actually, I mean, it was a really good automatic, if you will, transmission, very, very quick shifting. And it's very fun to drive even in the automatic. So, I mean, if you want to save $150,000 on your
right.
of a Ferrari.
Yeah, no, that's true. If you just want to join the club and be part of all these fantastic events and have a somewhat modern car, I agree with you. You can buy them. We looked this morning, once again, I think we were on Auto Trader or Car Gurus, And I saw a Ferrari 360, not a bad car, 2000 to 2005, 400 horsepower. We saw one this morning for $79,000. I mean, that's not a bad price for a great car. It was the F1 gearbox, but not, that's a good point. That's a great car. It's modern, and it's $79,000.
And in similarity, I mean, we drove the Ferrari F430, which is kind of the next generation to the 360, slightly different body styling, perhaps a little bit sleeker. And it was an incredibly fun car to drive. And again, you're not really going to find those. I don't even know if they made that in a manual transmission.
They did make it in a manual transmissions.
But it was only like one model year that they did that. So again, you're going to pay a premium for that. But you can find a really nice Nick Ferrari 430 or F430 for anywhere between $89,000 and $150,000. Again, it's a lot of money for a 15-year-old, 12-year-old car. But it's not a car that's going to go out of style. That's the thing about Ferraris. They do not go out of style.
Yeah. And and just to wrap up the 360, we did see a manual version this morning, and that was on Car Gurus, and it was $99,000. It was in a blue color, I believe, so it wasn't the traditional Ferrari red. So if you're looking for a manual, an inexpensive Ferrari manual, $100,000's not too bad for the V8 360.
No, it's a solid platform. The engine platform is a tried and true proven engine platform from Ferrari. They've used that for generations. So it's an incredibly solid foundation that they drop into all of these Ferraris. They're all mid-engine cars. You can almost go back to the early 80s and look at the 308, and that's basically the same V8 motor that's in there.
Right. Yeah. It's just been improved and improved.
We brought the Mondial up a few times, which was, I think the first generation of the Mondial was in something like 1960 or something like that. But they brought it back in the mid 80s. And again, it's not the sexiest of Ferrari body styles, but it was available in a coupe, and it was also available in a cabriolet or a spider or convertible, whichever way you'd like to call it. And in the convertible version, it's a very sleek, sexy car. And you can find those, again, for much less than you would find, say, a Ferrari 308 of just a couple of years prior to that. Like the 308 was made famous in the Cannonball Run, like you mentioned, and also the Tom Selleck TV show Magnum PI, which really brought that car to the forefront. But the Mondial, you're going to find that car for $15,000 to $50,000 less than you would find a similar Nick 308.
Yeah, agree. And before we wrap up, we talked the good point. We talked 308. We talked Mondial. We talked the V12 Grand Tours, the 550, 575, and the 599. And we talked a little bit about the V8. More traditional Ferrari, which is the 360 and the F430. One thing that we would be remiss if we didn't bring up is it's pretty much my pick. I think it's your pick too for the most undervalued unique Ferrari out there, and that is the Testarossa.
Yeah.
So the Testarossas were built. There's two versions. There's an earlier version that was built from 1985 to 1991. The first year they had the flying mirror. And if you can find one of those were very unique. And that was a single mirror that went up high, kind of like a Formula One car. So those are sought after a little more in general. But, Chris, we're talking about value here. This is a V12 Ferrari. I don't think they're ever going to make anything that looks like this ever again. It's wide.
It's wide.
And
it's an understatement.
And you can find them the first generation of them for $125,000.
Honestly, that is not that much money for that vehicle because it's got that V12 package, which Ferrari always loves putting more cylinders in their engine. But,
right.
Aerodynamics are made for people that can't make an engine. Well, Ferrari certainly could make an engine.
Right.
Old famous Enzo Ferrari quote. And I would agree with you. The first generation, the first iteration of the Testarossa, in my mind, would be much more valuable just because it is a little bit more unique. It's kind of funny that they took the first rule of motor racing of what's behind you does not matter, and
right, with the flying
effectively of the right side view mirror.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's unique about that car if you can find one. But yeah, it's true. I mean, the second generation was called the 512 TR, which of course stood for Testarossa, and those were built 92 to 96. There are a lot fewer of those, and it's a better car because they developed it. So they sold for a lot more. So those are currently more than the first generation. Those are in the high 100s.
Right.
But a beautiful car, and they learned some lessons on the first generation. So if you could afford it, the last year of any model is usually the most valuable. So a 96 Ferrari 512 TR might be a cool car. But getting back real quick to the earlier generation Testarossa, they were hovering around, as far as depreciation cycle, they went down as low as probably $60,000 about 15, 20 years ago. And they've been slowly making their way up. About 4 years ago, they were closer to 100, and now they're up to about 125. But, Chris, I'm really high on this car because I just don't see Ferrari making anything that looks like this ever again. It's a V12, it's a manual, and it's $125,000. I think in 10 years, people are going to be like, yeah, remember when you could buy a Testarossa for $125,000?
Right. I agree with you. I mean, and there's two things here, is particularly, this goes more towards the second generation of the Testarossa. They made so few, not because it was a limited run. It came out in an era where the supercar was not in vogue.
Right.
And It did not sell for Ferrari. It did not sell well. So they really curtailed the production, mainly because it just wasn't selling as a product. Which,
that's a good point. And they switched
today's collector, because that is the kind of thing. It's like they didn't make it because it didn't sell, and you kind of look back and go, why? That car was amazing. It's a one-off. And like you said, Charlie, they're not, most likely, not in our lifetime, it's going to make something like that again.
Yeah, and they shifted, you're right, they shifted resources over to the 550 Maranello, the two-seat Grand Tour, and they used the V12. And so they kind of curtailed, they stopped making the Testarossa. So, yeah, we're both really, really high on this car. I don't know if you have any follow-up before we take our final break?
Not on the Testarossa. Again, the thing to do with any Ferrari that you are looking at purchasing is to do your due diligence. Make sure you do that pre-purchase inspection, the PPI, and utilize the resources that are available from like Haggerty's. And you mentioned Car Gurus where you can see how the market is actually trending, and they're actually very, very accurate. And that's going to be true with any car. And I think we brought it up a little bit. But the key is to find something that's going to make you happy. It doesn't have to be the most expensive Ferrari on the block. You don't have to spend the most money to feel value. What you need to do is get something that fits within, and we're talking about budgets of over $100,000, but fits within your budget, and that you actually decide that you want to go drive. I think the most important thing about any Ferrari car is that you go drive it. It looks great in a showroom. It looks even better with the RPMs up at 7,000 and the wind blowing in your hair and the engine just screaming behind you as you drive through some cool tunnel.
Yeah, that's a great point. You definitely have to drive the car before you buy it. Make sure we've made that mistake. So take it from the speed travelers. Don't make that mistake. Go and drive the car first. All right. Well, we are going to come back with our final block, and we're going to talk a little bit about road trip news taking Highway 1 north and south. And we're also going to talk about the big F1 race over the weekend. Once again, this is the Speed Traveler Roadshow on KHTS Radio. All right. Welcome back to the Speed Traveler Roadshow. You can find us on KHTS Radio, hometownstation.com. You can also catch all of our shows. I think we're on show number 6 or 7, but all of them are at our YouTube channel, which is The Speed Traveler. So check it out there. Comment. We always get back to people that have questions, so feel free to check us out there. But Chris, we're in our final segment. We're going to talk about a couple fun road trips we took, and we're also going to talk F1 news.
Yeah, you know what? And, we just mentioned people leaving their comments. And since we're on the segment of, talking about some of our favorite roads, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Coast Highway, you know what? I'm going to put something out to our listeners. We would love to hear your story about your favorite road. And if we talk about your favorite road and send us some pictures as well, and if we post your photos and your pictures and talk about your story, we'll send you a Speed Traveler t-shirt. Message us at our YouTube channel, The Speed Traveler, and we definitely would love to see your stories on your favorite roads.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know what? We went a little long talking about the Ferrari Buyer's Guide, so we'll make the segment a little brief. But we took a fun trip, and in today's featured marque is the Ferrari, and we have a video on our YouTube channel called Ford versus Ferrari, where we drove up Highway 1, and what a great trip that was.
It was really exciting. I talked about the visceral experience of being able to drive the Ferrari on the Coast Highway and, putting the top down on the Spider, the F430 Spider, putting the top down and hearing the wind, hearing the engine. It was just such a visceral experience that, I don't care what car you're in, go do it. But if you have something that sounds like a Ferrari,
yeah, go and do
it that much better.
Yeah, and you know what? As Chris mentioned, if you want to leave us a comment and you want to know the exact route that we took, just shoot us a comment, send us a question. We'll tell you exactly how we made that trip. But we're going to bounce now to Formula One news, and Ferrari is our featured marque. We've been waiting weeks to do this Ferrari show. And as it happens, Ferrari won the F1 race in Singapore last weekend.
Oh, my God. That was a nail biter. I got to tell you, again, we're talking about Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc as being the drivers for Ferrari. Right now, Carlos Sainz seems to be doing an incredible job. It was a team effort. Both cars drove incredibly well. Charles Leclerc made a great start. So the Ferraris were running 1 and 2 for the first stint of that race. The second stint was a bit of a management for, I think, all teams out on track. But wow, that third stint as we were making it to the checkered flag, unbelievable excitement. I don't think I have a fingernail left on either hand.
Yeah, it was a nail biter for sure. You mentioned Carlos Sainz. It's crazy to think, but before Formula One's annual summer break, there was rumors of Carlos not coming back to Ferrari next year, and he has totally turned it around. He got his first win in a Ferrari. It was his second win overall, but what a great turnaround for Carlos.
Oh, yeah, unbelievable. We saw the Ferraris showing some pace at the beginning of the year to some degree. Like there was an opportunity that they could be quick, but for whatever reasons, the rules, the regulations for this year have not really allowed the Ferrari to flourish again until now. And, Charles Leclerc has been driving incredibly well. He drives very aggressive. We're going to see him take some wins in the future, I'm certain. But you're absolutely right. Carlos Sainz was pretty much driving for his seat. And honestly, with pole in Monza at the Italian Grand Prix, with pole at Singapore, and taking the race victory with an incredible, thoughtful drive. His brain was in the race the entire time. He secured his seat, in my opinion, for the 2024 season.
Yeah, no question about it. And it's interesting that Charles Leclerc was the sacrificial lamb. He was the one that was kind of backing up the rest of the cars. And, I'm sure Leclerc wasn't ecstatic about that, but the roles have been reversed a lot of times before.
Yeah, and I'm glad that Ferrari actually stepped in and made a comment to that point. They said, we're working. They said on radio, we're working for the win.
Yeah.
No question. They didn't allow them. Honestly, Monza almost destroyed my brain when I was watching Charles and Carlos go at it in the last 2 laps.
Yeah, exactly.
almost took each other out.
Yeah, no question. But the other runners, it was such an exciting race. At the end of the race, Lando Norris was in second in the McLaren on old tires. Carlos was on old tires. And the Mercedes guys made a really heady move, and they came in and put some tires on with about 12 laps to go. And they were flying at the end of the race. George Russell in third and Lewis Hamilton in fourth.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz using his brain to recognize that if he got Lando Norris into the DRS zone, they'd be able to, that would help both of their defenses against those up-and-coming Mercedes. George Russell was the man Pizzowski. He was possessed. He was driving like a demon wind. He was definitely, in my mind, faster than Lewis Hamilton in the race.
Yep.
It was unfortunate that he clipped the wall that Lando Norris also clipped it, but they both clipped the wall in the final turn. And unfortunately for George, it put him into the wall, which then gave Lewis Hamilton, what was it? His 196th podium?
Yeah, an unbelievable amount. Yeah, that's crazy. But if you didn't see the race, you definitely want to go find it, a replay of it. And good point on Lewis Hamilton. It's funny, Hamilton seemed pretty down on the podium after, even though it was his, a record-setting podium. I think he felt like he had managed his tires a little better than Russell, and he might have had something for Sainz and Lando. What do you think?
I would definitely agree with that. You could see that George was pushing and getting to Lando's rear end very, very swiftly.
Yep.
He was definitely working that car over. I think that was some of his youthful exuberance. Lewis Hamilton, he's a wily veteran at this point. He knows how to conserve his tires. There was a time when Lewis Hamilton would be kind of goaded into that race and eating up his tires. And now he's the wily veteran that's goading other people. So I would definitely think that Lewis Hamilton had more tire when it came down to the last three races. But you can't make that switch.
Laps.
If Mercedes made that switch with 3 laps to go to say, okay, Lewis, you go for the win, and if you don't get it, then we're going to switch it back. There's no way they could manage that.
No way, yeah.
Especially on a tight, twisty track like Singapore.
Yeah, he was disappointed, but, that's all he could do. But it was an amazing race. Max Verstappen's amazing record run of 10 wins in a row came to an end. Red Bull was just nowhere all weekend.
Yeah, they were definitely in the weeds. I don't know if that's regulation change, if it was a floor change. They keep talking about the floor. I have a feeling it has more to do with a regulatory adjustment because the Red Bulls seem to have kind of lost a little bit of that overall pace that they've just exhibited throughout the season. They've been completely 100% dominant up until Monza when Carlos took the pole. But I feel like now these other cars, especially McLaren and Ferrari, of course, are back in the mix. And the next few races are going to be incredibly exciting. It's this coming weekend. It's going to be telling what happens with what I'll call the second tier teams. And honestly, the top of that list is Red Bull at the moment. But with Ferrari, McLaren, hopefully Mercedes, hopefully Aston Martin can kind of turn things around. And by the way, I have to bring up the Williams livery from the Singapore Grand Prix. That was an absolutely beautiful car.
Yeah. Oh, it was an unbelievable car. Well, Chris, the cookie timer is ringing right now, which means we have run out of time. But you brought up Mercedes. That is going to be our featured marque next week. And you have been listening to the Speed Traveler Roadshow, and that is on KHTS radio locally in Newhall, California. You can also find all of our shows on our YouTube channel, which is The Speed Traveler. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with Mercedes.